Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the 19th meeting in 2012 of the Local Government and Regeneration Committee. As usual, can I ask everyone to ensure that they have switched off mobile phones and other electronic equipment, please. Before we move on to the business of the meeting, I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate the former convener of the committee, Joe Fitzpatrick, MSP, on his appointment as Minister for Parliamentary Business, and I'm sure that we all wish him well in his new position. Thank you. Agenda item 1 is decisions on taking business in private. Our first item today is that. Can we agree that items 4 and 5, item 4 being the consideration of potential witnesses for scrutiny of the draft 2013-14 budget, and item 5 is initial approach to strand 3 of our public services reform inquiry in private. Can we agree? Agreed. Thank you very much for that. Agenda item 2 is subordinate legislation. It's consideration of the instrument which relates to the continuous enforce of the South Lanarkshire Local Plan. The instrument is not subject to any parliamentary procedure, and the Subordinate Legislation Committee had no comments to make in relation to it. Are members content to note this instrument? Content. Thank you very much. Okay. The clerk is telling me to welcome Jamie Hepburn as a substitute today. Do you have any declarations, Jamie?
No.
Thank you very much. If we can move on to agenda item 3, which is an oral evidence session looking at benchmarking system operated by Scottish Water. This session follows on from the seminar the committee held on Monday on local government benchmarking. For information, a recording of the seminar is now available on YouTube, no less. Somebody will have to teach me how to get onto YouTube. I'd like to welcome Belinda Oldfield, Regulations General Manager with Scottish Water. You're very welcome, Ms Oldfield. Would you like to make some opening remarks to the committee?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting Scottish Water along to give evidence to you. We've certainly learned a lot over the last 10 or 11 years with benchmarking and with the advent of regulation, so we're quite keen to share that with other public authorities in Scotland. Obviously benchmarking was introduced when regulation was introduced back in 2000-2001. I think it's fair to say, and I did set this out in the short paper that was supplied, that it wasn't entirely welcome. So we did initially have our challenges when it was first introduced. It's fair to say that it wasn't well understood. And we had the added complexity that it was linked to our price control. So it was very much about setting efficiency targets for Scottish Water. So the initial benchmarking information that was actually taken from the predecessor authorities was used to inform those efficiency targets. So initially we had no in-house capability. But we did rectify that very quickly over the first couple of years. So we did actually work to understand the benchmarking. We were able to replicate benchmarking. And a key point was to bring in the skills and the capability to be able to understand benchmarking. So we moved away from running it, if you like, with our traditional skill sets of engineers, but we moved into having recruiting economists and statisticians and more analytically capable people so that they would understand it a lot better. Over the first 4 years, the importance of that return of benchmarking information was very high for the business, and it was a huge challenge for us to switch quite a large national service organisation onto examining its performance and delivering more efficient service improvements. And so we did find some helpful techniques to do that, which I'm quite happy to share with you. On the publication of benchmarking information, the Water Industry Commission, who was then the Commissioner but is now the Commission, they have published annually. So leak tables and comments on our improving efficiency position have been public domain for the last 10, 11 years. I think it's fair to say that now, 10, 11 years down the line, we're very supportive of benchmarking. We do quite a lot of internal benchmarking, a lot of external benchmarking. We also do international benchmarking, and last week we hosted the Scandinavian 6 cities who benchmark with us. So we do a lot of benchmarking. So happy to take questions on areas of interest to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, quite interesting, the international aspect of benchmarking there as well. Can I first of all ask you, how did Scottish Water, WICS, go about developing data that was consistent with its peers, and what challenges and difficulties had to be overcome? We hear a lot about comparing apples with oranges in this game. How are you comparing apples with apples, if you like?
We were quite fortunate in the water industry because the benchmarking itself, the tools and techniques, they'd been developed by Ofwat back in the late 80s. So the benchmarking tools were available in England and Wales. Our biggest challenge in Scotland was we had never done this before. We didn't necessarily collect the information in a way that was consistent with the way the benchmarking definitions required it to be. So we had the added complexity that having merged the 3 predecessor authorities into one, the benchmarking actually started with the 3 predecessor authorities. So we had 3 different ways of collecting information. We had 3 different interpretations of the definitions of the benchmarking. And one of our first challenges was to actually merge that first set of information and to try and make that comparable. So one organisation would collect information in a slightly different way, and it wouldn't precisely fit the description of trying to look at, is that a compliant works or not. So we had a job internally to actually bring together 3 different data sets. We then had missing information. Missing information was almost easier to deal with because we could establish there was a gap. We had to go and get information that fitted benchmarking descriptions. When you had information that didn't quite fit benchmarking descriptions, it was looking at, well, the north of Scotland did it this way, east of Scotland did it that way, west of Scotland did it another way, which is actually the most consistent or the most faithful with the actual benchmarking description, and actually teasing that out and then merging all the data onto one definition. So the initial challenges were around sort of gaps in information and trying to make sure that information was precisely what was being benchmarked, what was being sought out. So.
Thank you very much. James Dornan.
Thanks very much, Belinda. Further to Kevin's question, outside of Ofwat and the existing benchmarking that you had with the 3 organisations, to what extent did Scottish Water look for good practice examples or benchmarkings either outside the water industry or in other countries?
We have been party to international benchmarking for quite some time, and again, it is actually run by Ofwat. Ofwat run an international benchmarking league table, if you like, and we also supply information to that. I think it would be fair to say that in the first few years, we were very focused on the UK benchmarking. We had to get that right, and we had to try and ensure that the organisation understood the importance of it. And we used a lot of techniques to actually do that. It's only really been in the last possibly 5 or 6 years that international benchmarking and looking beyond the sector has been equally as important for us, as the benchmarking tools now are they're needing to be reviewed and refreshed, and we're actively working with the regulator to do that.
Can I come back?
James.
Thank you. You spoke earlier on about initial resistance to benchmarking. Right. How did you manage to overcome that, and does that resistance still remain?
As I said earlier, we didn't have the capability within Scottish Water when we were first given, if you like, the results of the first set of benchmarking information, and we were first asked to achieve 40% efficiency reductions in our operating costs. So conceptually that was quite difficult for the senior management team. At that time, they weren't bought into benchmarking. We believed that in Scotland we were different. What we had to do at that time was outsource a lot of can we get the benchmarking replicated? Is it telling us the right thing? And so very quickly we were able to understand that it was actually directionally correct. There wasn't a lot that we could argue with about the benchmarking. Whilst our information wasn't perfect, and it still isn't perfect, benchmarking is high level, it's at a sort of organisational level, and it was showing us a direction of travel. And we at that time became more focused on, you know, you're asking us to deliver quite big efficiency targets, so are you asking us to do this too fast? So we switched our focus onto the speed at which we were being asked to deliver efficiencies. The benchmarking itself, we quickly brought our own capability in-house to be able to handle that. And so we did, over the first 2 to 3 years, start to build a confidence in benchmarking, what it would tell us, and then build that with the rest of the organisation. So it was something that organisation-wide was a challenge for us, getting the whole organisation to understand and have confidence that we were being asked to do the right thing.
Now that you've bought into it completely?
Absolutely. And I think, and it is easy, and I have to say that it is easy with hindsight. Here we are 10, 11 years down the road. The benchmarking was directionally correct. It has helped us deliver huge improvements for customers in terms of both cost efficiency and service improvements. There isn't a downside to this in our situation. So, okay.
Before I bring in Mr. Pentland, can we maybe go a little further back into history? And I don't know if you would have the detail or not, but you've talked about the 3 previous water authorities. In terms of the days where water was actually controlled by the regional councils, did any benchmarking take place at that point between the regional councils and water services? Not that I'm aware of. I was part of Central Region prior to the establishment of the water authorities, and I'm certainly not aware of benchmarking that was done at that time. But I might be incorrect. Thank you, John Pentland.
Morning, Melinda. Obviously, when you embark on, the best practice and you identify new indicators, and in the benchmarking process, as part of the benchmarking process, the indicators either become outdated or they become irrelevant. And so, how does the review process work in that practice? And are there any difficulties in removing and adding new indicators?
In practice, I mean, one of the examples I would give is one of our key indicators is the overall performance assessment, what we call OPA, and that is a basket of 17 indicators, and it all adds up into one number, which is fairly straightforward to follow. But the various components of that particular indicator, they do change and have changed over time. And we do that in conjunction with, in discussion with regulators and other companies. As we see a particular measure that's becoming not quite redundant, it's no longer adding value. We can change various components of the benchmarking. So we tend to do that in discussion with regulators and with other companies. And that there has been evidence of that over the last 5-6 years across the UK.
Sure. And with regards to, obviously, the relationship with the regulator, do you find that they're a body that you have to negotiate with, or is it somebody that you have to, listen to?
It's certainly, it's a body that we now work with. I think in terms of our business performance, and the service improvements we've made, the regulators a lot more comfortable that we understand our business, we're driving it in the right direction. So the discussions with the regulator now are much more informative, where we see a need or a benefit in changing direction to measure something differently. The regulator's keen to listen to that. So that's something that we're very fortunate to have that relationship in Scotland.
Before I bring in Mr. Torrance here, obviously you have a number of regulators.
Yes.
4, in fact, is that correct, in terms of drinking water quality, SEPA, Water Watch Scotland and the WICS?
And in fact, Waterworks Scotland is now Consumer Focused Scotland.
In terms of those changes to indicators, do you actually have to go and talk to all of these people?
We haven't historically, because the benchmarking is, if you like, it's run by the Water Industry Commission, and because it's run on a UK-wide set of information. That's been a bilateral conversation between us and the Water Industry Commission. But benchmarking is moving on even in the UK, and we are in discussion with DWQR and with SEPA and with the Commission to actually add a slightly different Scottish dimension to some of the work we're doing going forward. So whilst historically we haven't been involving what we'd call our quality regulators or consumer focus, that's actually happening at the moment. Just coincidentally, we're having some discussions about changing benchmarking for the period from 2015 to 2020.
And do these bodies talk to one another about any changes to your indicators?
Yes, they do, and the Commission has had discussions with the Drinking Water Quality Regulator and with SEPA about the relevance of these to try and make sure that they do remain relevant. Sometimes it wouldn't be correct to just chase certain benchmarking for the sake of it. It's got to be delivering improvements.
Mr. Torrance.
Morning, Melinda. How are the outputs of benchmarking tools used in practice? And can Scottish Water give practical examples of the changes that have been made as a result of benchmarking data?
I think probably the biggest, most significant example I could give, there's two. One is in terms of cost efficiency, and we've driven obviously quite a lot of efficiency through Scottish Water and reduced our costs quite significantly. In terms of the service improvement, the biggest example is back to the overall performance assessment. When we were first benchmarked with England and Wales, we were definitely in the lower quartile of this our service indicator. And so at that point, we were very much a low service, low service, high cost organisation. Over the past 5-6 years, what we've done is moved that overall performance assessment right up into the top quartile, and that's evident from the Commission's own published performance reports. So we're now working towards, and we're pretty much at a sort of high service, low cost organisation rather than our starting position.
Mr. Torrance.
Can Scottish Water explain in more detail how special factors work in benchmarking?
I think it's fair to say that some of the benchmarking tools are really, really quite complex. They're not accurate, and they don't necessarily explain every organisation's particular set of circumstances. And so there is a need to be able to put in place what are called explanatory factors or special factors, which actually explain a different set of circumstances. We've certainly done this for all of our operations in the Northwest area. Regionally, it's a much more remote population. We deliver the service over a more remote population. We incur more cost because we're driving much bigger distances to actually respond to customer service issues, etc. So what we did was we set about explaining that and with the ability then to make an adjustment to some of the benchmarking models. It's an area that we'd be quite happy to come and talk to any of the local authorities about, because there will be some that it's obviously impacts on costs when if you're operating in the Central Belt, that's all very nice, thank you, and if you're operating in Aberdeen, in a city, or in Glasgow, it's all very helpful. That's very straightforward benchmarking. But if you're actually out in the Highlands and Islands, you will need to have a set of special factors that describe a different operating environment.
I think it might be useful for the committee to catch sight of one of these indicators with the explanatory notes showing how you actually look at Aberdeen compared to Northwest Highlands or whatever it may be. I think if that could be sent, that would be very, very useful indeed. Okay. Anne McTaggart.
Good morning, Belinda. Are there still shortcomings in the Scottish Water benchmarking system, and if so, how are they dealt with?
I think it's all relative. We certainly had shortcomings when we first started, and even now, I would say the data, the information is not perfect because it's very difficult to get information that's perfect. How we overcame those types of challenges. Sorry, have I misunderstood your question? Can I just go back?
Certainly. Really, it was about the shortcomings in the Scottish Water and the system itself, the benchmarking system. How are you dealing with them?
Okay, sorry, I beg your pardon. In the early days, we had shortcomings around things like data quality. So what we did with the organisation was actually look at the key parts of benchmarking. There's quite a lot of benchmarking information that is actually asked for, and it's quite important to understand some of that information is more important than others, and it's actually trying to understand and see the wood from the trees. And what we did initially was actually seek out all of the individual data providers within Scottish Water, and we ran workshops with those people, and we actually ran simulations with them so that they could actually practice on the models, on the benchmarking models. They could actually make stupid mistakes and go, look what happens when it comes out the other end. So we very much connected the people at an operational level who were providing information and who were responsible for data quality into what it looks like when it comes out the other end of the benchmarking. And so what we did with our staff was instill the importance of data quality. And data quality was one of those shortcomings that you were looking for. And data quality is still a journey today. That's just a constant journey to try and make sure that when we're dealing with this information, it is coming through and it has the right confidence bands around it.
Superb. And again, yeah, thanks, Convener. The improvements that obviously we've read about and you've spoke about earlier on, and the productivity made by the Scottish Water, was that down to benchmarking, or was it a product of the merger of the three bodies?
It was a combination of both. The benchmarking told us exactly where Scottish Water lay in the league tables, if you like, and what the efficiency gap was. But undoubtedly, when we merged, there were merger efficiencies. So we didn't need to have 3 head offices. We didn't need to have 3 management teams. So those were efficiencies that came through, if you like, automatically from a 3 to 1. But the benchmarking then took us on that efficient service delivery journey. What was the gap? And that's what was established. So.
Thank you. Thanks.
Joel, first, please.
Good morning, Linda. The committee's interested looking at benchmarking in general to see if there's lessons that can be learned for local government. So from your experience at Scottish Water and with the benefit of hindsight, when you established the system, is there anything that you would have done differently?
I think if I were to do it differently, I think it would be really helpful at the outset to have greater clarity and understanding of why benchmarking is needed and what benefits it will deliver. I don't think that those conversations were full enough between the regulator and the predecessor authorities. The conversations became fuller when it was between the regulator and Scottish Water. But I think one of the initial challenges in bringing benchmarking into any service delivery environment is actually giving the people who have to be benchmarked that compelling argument as to what is the big benefit here, and to try and dispel the natural fears that come with it, and try and transform that into big benefits. I mean, I was quite struck last week when we were hosting the Scandinavian countries, because it's fair to say that we came to benchmarking because we were regulated. The 6 cities, 5 out of 6 of them are not regulated, but they actually have that forethought to see benchmarking is really important. It's important to delivering service and efficiency, and they're actually doing it without a regulatory mechanism or a regulatory stick behind them. And that was one of the things that struck me most. So I think with hindsight, more conversation, more understanding up front, more discussion with some of the senior management teams and the public, the reputational stimulus that comes from this, because actually what you're doing is putting it out into the public domain, and the benchmarking will inevitably produce a league table, and in the first instance it may or may not be quite correct because information will be moving over time, and it starts to give a relative ranking as to which organisations are delivering more effectively and more efficiently, and that's something that we should all be seeking out for services in Scotland. We shouldn't be concerned about being threatened about whether we're at the bottom of the league or not.
I'll tease out the league table things a little bit later, but basically it's putting it in context and spending a lot of time up front really selling it. I suppose on the presumption that one volunteer is worth 10 conscripts, so if you take everybody with you, then it's got a better chance of success. In particular, as regards the collection of data and the use of benchmarking outputs, are there any lessons that you could pass on to other organisations about how this information was used?
Probably yes. Difficult to be specific because I'm not clear on the type of benchmarking that the local authorities might be looking at. Inevitably, there would be use in having conversations with the local authorities about what we did and how we did it, and how we overcame some of the data quality issues, how we got some ownership in the business from the people who actually own the key bits of operational information. How we developed our own processes, our own controls and assurances around that information, because that now goes, a lot of that is signed off and goes to Scottish Water Board. So there's quite a lot of things that we've done to deliver quality around the benchmarking, which actually goes right up to Scottish Water Board, which I'm quite happy to share with local authorities.
Was there an independent assessment of what you were doing in that process?
Yes, there was. We had what used to be called the reporter. So the reporter had a formal audit role between Scottish Water, who would come and audit us on all the information, and then he would report independently back to the Commission, and the reporter also would report to our audit committee. That reporter has been replaced by an independent assessor, so they've changed the name of it, but it's basically doing the same function. The independent assessor no longer audits our information for the Commission. The Commission is content that our information has quality wrapped around it. As an organisation, we still ask the independent assessor to look at our information from our own governance arrangements. We still want to have that inbuilt governance and assurance around it, that we're happy with the quality of it. We don't want it to deteriorate.
So that independent aspect is absolutely crucial, certainly at the beginning and thereafter, as and when the organisation thinks it would be helpful.
It is. And the added benefit of that independent scrutiny is that those individuals, the reporter is more than one person, it's a team of auditors, they actually bring their own experience from other organisations. So they can actually also in conversation saying, well, one of the other organisations does this a slightly different way and it works better, it's more effective. So we have a sort of inbuilt learning feedback loop that comes with the reporter services.
That's very helpful. Turning now to the thorny question of league tables, you've mentioned this has been done in this form for 10 to 11 years, so the obvious question in terms of public and press perception, was there any problems, adverse coverage, and if so, how was this handled?
I'm confident we had adverse coverage. I can't believe that we haven't. We certainly have had adverse coverage over the years. Not so much now at all. I think what it brings to the situation is that added stimulus, because reputationally you don't want to be in that position. So it creates that added stimulus for more focus on improving services. So it drives behaviour within the business. I'm sure if we'd been asked at that point, were we seeing the upside of bad press? No, we probably wouldn't. With the benefit of hindsight, having been there, it's not a place that you want to be. So it does derive the right behaviours within the business to make sure that you're getting that service change that you need.
And was there a positive move to try and say this to the press, that, you know, we realise this is falling short of where we'd like to be, and we will take steps to remedy? Was there some?
I mean, we've always been very consistent that we're aware of any shortcomings that have been picked up, that we're committed to service improvement, we're committed to delivering the service more effectively and more efficiently. So we've always been positive about what we take out of it. But it does have that impetus that you don't want to be there year after year.
From the evidence we've taken so far, Convener, the press coverage is something people are very wary of, and so as much information we can get of good practice and how that was managed well would be very useful.
Jamie Hepburn, please.
Very much, Convener. It's just in relation, I suppose, the league table issue is related to this question. Clearly, the whole purpose of a benchmarking exercise is to see how you are doing in a range of indicators by comparison to some of your peers, be that the other companies across the UK, or indeed if you're using the same indicators with, for example, these 6 Scandinavian cities, which is useful. It allows people like us and people out there to know how Scottish Water is doing by comparison with the other similar type organisations. But I would imagine what might be even more useful, certainly to the people I represent in Cumbernauld South, is to know how you are doing against these range of indicators in Cumbernauld South as opposed to other parts of Scotland. Can you tell me how you might undertake that form of benchmarking exercise within Scotland itself on an area-to-area basis, if you do it at all?
We do some area-to-area internal benchmarking. It starts to get difficult depending on the regional boundaries and where we have cut-offs. This is maybe a bit of technical complexity, but you could have a treatment works sitting in Turret that actually delivers water into Cumbernauld, but actually the operational boundary has actually stopped at Stirling. So the information is sometimes tricky to give local benchmarking information and for that to be precise and accurate. It's much easier when the information is actually taken up to a higher level and you're looking at the whole country. We do some area benchmarking, but it is regional, and it does move over time because we change our operating areas for service reasons, not for benchmarking reasons. And actually the service...
So the areas you use don't compare to Scottish Parliament constituency boundaries or local authority boundaries?
No.
So it begs the question, how useful would that information be to? I mean, what are the areas you're using? Would people recognise them? Is it only useful for internal purposes?
It's really only useful for internal purposes at this stage. I mean, I'm quite happy to have a think about it and come back to you to see if there's any merits in dropping it down to other levels of detail. But my initial reflection is no, it isn't. The most that we would drop down to is northeast, southwest, because those are our operational areas at the moment. We do find that regional boundaries and council boundaries do change over time, so it's not. And it isn't.
But often, though, I mean, to be fair, the last local government reorganisation was in the mid-1990s, yeah. So, before that was the mid-70s, so you're not talking that regularly.
Well, possibly not. But I think keeping information at a high level, being able to process benchmark, which is something slightly different, which is looking at, well, if you've got a works in Aberdeen and you've got a works in Edinburgh, do they compare? How do they compare? And that operational information is very important for us. What I'd need to have a think about is what would be more helpful for customers in Cumbernauld, for example.
Because your customers are our constituents, so...
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. John Pentland.
Belinda, in 2002, Scottish Water was established, and I'm looking at the you know, some of the briefing here, but it wasn't until 2005, 2006 when we seen there was a, you know, a annual savings of nearly, you know, well over £100 million, and since then it's actually improved. So between actual establishing Scottish Water and, you know, the years before there was a return, was there an ongoing cost associated to that? I.e., you know, were you spending money to obviously get the return in the end, and what kind of cost is it? What was the cost of embarking on the benchmarking process?
The cost of embarking on the benchmarking process itself was pretty modest. It certainly wasn't material. Probably in terms of the number of people that were involved, we were probably doing it for hundreds of thousands of pounds, certainly not millions of pounds. Within the price control, within the settlement, if you like, that the Water Industry Commissioner financed us for in the years 2002 to 2006, what he recognised was that it was called a spend to save allowance, that there was a necessity to spend money up front to actually then deliver more efficiencies further down the line. So there was an amount of money that was actually allowed in the first price control to help facilitate deliver efficiency savings.
Can I ask you maybe a little bit of an unfair question? Can you maybe explain a little bit more what, in your opinion, would be required in terms of additional skills to allow local authorities to successfully introduce benchmarking?
Well, certainly, it's not an unfair question. We were in this situation ourselves, and I think from our perspective and our experience, we needed to have much higher levels of analytical capability. I mean, we were being regulated, which had never happened to us before, and we needed regulatory economists, or what other people might call industrial economists. We needed those particular types of individuals to help us through that whole sea of benchmarking and regulation. The other thing I referred to earlier was a number of statisticians. So it's really looking at people who were had high levels of statistical capability or mathematical capability, or the regulatory industrial economists who look at organisations. That's what their skill set is. They look at an organisation and they look at how you deliver productivity gains through that organisation. And it's not something that we had, because we were really traditionally an organisation with engineering skill sets and accountants. And that's not decrying engineers or accountants, but we did need to look to find the skills that would actually help us deliver the benefits.
John Pentland.
Final question for me, Chair. When you agreed, Belinda, that benchmarking was a way forward, what then was the timescale when the indicators were agreed and implemented?
It was a fairly short timescale, because the UK benchmarking system, which was, had been developed in England and Wales, was already there. So that had been developed, and really we were asked to benchmark our information on that basis. So there was no transitional period. We were given the tables of information that were being requested, and we had to complete those tables of information. I would say it probably took us 2 to 3 years to have moved from that initial data return, which wouldn't have been considered robust at that time, to a position where it was better, and it was better informed, and it was informing in the right direction. Now it's, the quality of it is very, is a lot higher. As I say, it's not perfect, but it's quite a big difference now from where it was when we started. But I think, if I'm understanding your question correctly, I'm assuming that the local authorities haven't yet agreed what that benchmarking looks like, because that hasn't already been constructed.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Can I thank you very much indeed for your evidence today, Ms Oldfield. I think it's been extremely useful for the committee to hear Scottish Water's experience. And now, as agreed, we'll move into private session. Thank you.